Welcome to another episode of the brand called You. Today, it is my privilege to welcome a very accomplished and senior professional manager. Arvind Mahajan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ashutosh.
Thank you. Arvind is the BCom Honors, then an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. He's been a senior corporate professional and management consultant. He's worked for KPMG, PwC, IBM, Ferguson, and Procter & Gamble. And he is the president and founding member of IIMPACT, which is providing free education to over 60,000 girls in rural India. Arvind, tell me a little bit about your early work and some of your early learnings.
So I would like to just give you, as you would have seen, that I've been a career management consultant, and but I would like to just tell you a story of my insight of why I became a management consultant. Of course, I connected the dots later.
Sure.
But what I realized was that from early childhood, I was very curious. And I love to learn new things all the time. I later learned that I had the inclination of what a Greek poet, Archilochus, referred to as a fox.
Okay.
Foxes, what they do is they like to learn many things, but maybe not very deeply, but sufficiently deep to understand it completely, and then move to interconnected areas to learn them. And through that, they sort of are very good at connecting the dots associated with how things are around them.
Right.
As opposed to a hedgehog, which tends to look at one big idea and go very deeply. So I'm telling you this story of fox and hedgehog, so to speak, to explain some of the career choices I did as a management consultant. Why I did that, I realized later that is because of my preference for, basically intensive learning environments, and new environments all the time. So that's it's not that foxes are more likely to succeed vis-a-vis a hedgehog. Both have successful careers.
Right.
It's just that I just wanted to explain some of my career choices related to that.
But that's a very interesting simile you've drawn. A fox and a hedgehog, and those are interesting characteristics of multiple managers.
Absolutely. And in fact, I almost never became a management consultant. As you know, from campus, I joined PNG, and my career was going in a groove. I was a BCom, as you said, then an MBA in finance and a finance specialist in PNG. But I realized very soon, after a few years, that my career had plateaued. And there was this opportunity with the then leading management consultancy firm, A.F. Ferguson's, which at that stage was perhaps the only major management consultancy of its type.
Correct.
So, but it was a risky move because I would be joined laterally and I didn't know whether I would succeed as a consultant. And secondly, many of my batchmates had joined earlier. Secondly, I was going to take a pay cut. PNG that day was a very good paymaster. So, but I took that decision, and as they say, is history, and probably the best decision, one of the best decisions I took in my career, which brought me to one lesson when I look back, is that very often when we take a career choice, we chase either money or past experience, leveraging past experience, right? But sometimes the best choice is actually to choose careers where, one, it's close to your passion, but more importantly, it is something which enables you to learn continually.
Correct.
So that's something which I learned. And later, the next part of my career was, okay, having become a consultant, how do I grow in that career? Again, if I had been a hedgehog, I would have chosen one specialization area and focused on it, and then grown to the topmost position, which is a partner, which gives you a lot of responsibility, freedom, and a lot of good pay. But I chose to move from finance to marketing, to organization and HR, and finally a strategy consulting. So it was a slightly circuitous and more strenuous route up. But in the latter part of my career, the fact that I had exposure to these functions enabled me to as a strategy consultant, make me connect the dots. And when I was running practice areas, it made me appreciate the issues associated with both finance, HR, etc. So the second learning which I got was that, it's sometimes important for you to embrace, basically change, in that sense, and, broaden your competency areas. And even if you are a hedgehog, try and broaden your competency and make it more relevant for the future, because this is particularly becoming more important in the current environment.
Correct.
And in fact, at some stage, I decided to leave AFF. And I realized that, while I was doing well, multinational consulting firms had started operating in India. They were doing well. And I hadn't realized that AFF was no longer the firm I had joined as the clear number one in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And when headhunters approached me, I didn't even try and explore the opportunities because I was doing well myself and I was comfortable.
Correct.
So when I talked about embracing change, it was really about, okay, understand what's happening outside and trends which are there. And I had not done that sufficiently. And maybe I would have changed maybe a few years earlier. Finally, it didn't make a difference because I got a very good opportunity with PwC, which was starting their strategy consulting practice. And, it enabled me to virtually have a startup situation, which was very different from AFF. But I had to build again a new team, a new competency, grow a practice as opposed to incrementally sort of this thing. So it was a totally new challenge.
So tell me, what would you say are the 3 key milestones in your life or career?
So the first part I would say in my career was, as I said, the fact that, I talked about the fact that, I moved into consulting. The second milestone for me was, okay, I became successful as a consultant with AFF, but I realized that, at some stage you need to move. And I did move to PwC, which later got acquired by IBM. But the key other aspect was that in each of these areas, I had to adapt myself, not to the role which was there. If I hadn't adapted to the role and see what was required for success in that role, a startup is very different.
Right.
And when I joined KPMG, I had to turn around a practice area, and later I had to grow one practice area 3 times. So you can't dwell in the past. You have to see what's required in the future and work accordingly. And in that context, the third thing which I would say, which was very important, which I found for the success, which most people don't think of. They think that if you build your technical capability, that's sufficient. As I grew up, I realized that you need to build a network, both within the organization as well as externally. And I had to build my own brand, again, not just in the physical world, but also later on in the digital world. And if I hadn't done that, basically, I wouldn't have been as successful as I am. So a lot of people are very narrowly focused and don't realize that you have to help yourself grow by focusing on some of these other things, which are softer aspects of building a career, but most people don't tell us that we need to do it.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, Arvind, let's move to your current passion, which is impact, spelt with a double IM, which I'm assuming is your alma mater. What does this venture do?
So, before coming to what it does, let me tell you the origin story of Impact.
Okay.
Basically, as you mentioned, IIMPACT batch members had gone for our Silver Jubilee after 25 years. Many of us were successful. We wanted to give back to society.
Correct.
As do many alumni meets of this time. But fortunately, we had amongst our batchmates somebody who mentioned that, at that point of time, there was still a large number of girls who were out of school and therefore were not getting access to education, particularly in rural India.
Correct.
Right? And therefore, we realized also, he also mentioned that one of the biggest investments anybody can make is educating girls because of its multiplier effects.
Sure.
So we decided to sort of set up basically a trust and an NGO which would focus on educating girls at the village level, out of school girls, and therefore we focus on the areas where this need was the most, where the literacy gap between male and female literacy was the most. So that's how we started IIMPACT,
Okay.
which, if you were to, we started with basically about 12 learning centers in a few villages in Alwar district of Rajasthan. But today we have nearly 2,000 learning centers in about 11 states, and we are basically have 60,000, nearly 60,000 girls in rural India on our rolls, and all of these are from underprivileged background. We're providing free of cost education. So that's
K to 12, right?
so no, we focused primarily on. We decided to focus on primarily on primary education. The aim was on primary education was to provide the girls a foundation in literacy and numeracy, and provide a bridge to the government schools at the 5th class, so they can mainstream at that point and continue the rest of their learning at that point of time.
Okay. And tell me, what are some of the key challenges you face managing so many girls in our country? You have a lot of external pressures. I've spoken to so many people who run NGOs for girls on my show, and there are a lot of external pressures when it comes to looking after so many girls. How do you manage these challenges?
So it is a significant challenge, and the key thing which helped for us was the fact is that the first thing which helped was, of course, the fact that we had a board which was largely alumni of IIM. So we were able to set the business model or the operating model of the NGO right from the beginning. But the most important factor, more than the ideas which came at the board and setting the values and the governing framework, was that we were very fortunate that one of our batchmates' wife gave up her career as a very successful school teacher in one of the top public schools, private schools, to take up full-time 24/7, almost like an entrepreneur, to build impact from the ground up. If we didn't have that, a lot of the ideas which we had to address some of these challenges would not have happened. But challenges, they were there, but we were very focused. As I said, we focused first. We said we'll focus only on girls. We'll focus in areas where the need is the maximum. And there's a lot of pressure to say, why not boys? Why not go higher? We were able to scale up to 60,000 girls because of the fact that we were focused.
Correct.
The second thing was we didn't try and reinvent the wheel. We realized that if we are going to operate in rural India, we, even with having somebody who's working 24/7, she can't be all over the place.
Correct.
So we partnered with local NGOs and built their capability in education to at the village level to make it happen.
Okay.
But we also said is that before we set up a center, we must get full commitment from the beneficiary, which were the parents and the community. If there was no commitment there, we did not set up a learning center.
Right.
This helped us, and one of the most important commitment, they had to give us a room in the village to set up this thing, and they had to make sure that the girls attended the school or learning center, as we call it. And finally, we realized that if you're going to set up in this thing, just looking at qualification of teachers is not enough. We earlier had B.Eds and graduates, but they used to leave because they're from urban areas and they couldn't survive in the rural areas beyond a point.
Correct.
So we decided to recruit from the community, build capability through training. We have orientation program. We assess and train the teacher every quarter. So it's train. So that helps us achieve our education outcomes, because finally we wanted to not just give access to education, but to ensure that when they moved to the 5th class, they had that numeracy and the literacy at that point of time. And fortunately, some of the studies which you've done show that the girls actually do much better compared to nearby government schools, as well as many state and national level benchmarks.
So that means you are tracking your students after they finish class 5 and graduate from IIMPACT and move on. You probably know where they are going and how they are doing in life.
That's true. But I would say is that that's something which we've started more recently.
Okay.
Initially it was more anecdotal. We had fewer girls and we could track them much more easily. Particularly the girls in Arvind, many of them have now passed graduate level. They've come back. Some have gone to become teachers. Some have, basically wanted to join the police force. Those are the role models in the village.
Yeah.
So some of that has started to happen. But what we also do is now much more this thing, look at our alumni we've actually, while we are 60,000 girls today, we have impacted 105,000 girls. 45,000 are at various stages of higher education. Some, as I said, have completed full education, in that sense.
That's incredible. Congratulations. Not just to you, but to your entire batch who had the vision to be able to support so many girls.
Absolutely. And, it's basically, even myself, I started actually when I was in my career. So when I started, I was just attending AGMs of Impact. Later, I joined the advisory board. Subsequently, I was on the board and then became an office bearer. So so there were a lot of people before me who did all the heavy lifting to make this happen to the level it is today.
That's amazing. So, Arvind, let's move on to the next part of the conversation. I want to talk to you a little bit about second innings. You and I are the same vintage. I have seen a lot of people who I've known don't want to plan what they will do post 60. Retirement is not considered to be a very nice word in our country. You have transitioned very, very nicely. You're a business advisor, you're a board member. What has been your experience in this journey?
So I would say is that I had a view that I would actually retire at 60, even though the business which I was running in KPMG was probably one of the most successful ventures in KPMG at that point of time in terms of growth, which it was achieving and the type of impact it was happening. But about 4 years earlier, I had taken a call that, okay, after I reach the age of 60, I would move into a career at the board level and I'll continue to maybe play a greater role in impact if the opportunity arose. So those are two things. One, in a way to sort of give back my learning at the board level and hopefully basically give back to society through impact. But luckily for me, about 4 to 5 years before I retired, there was an opportunity which arose in the KPMG board.
Okay.
India board, and the partners were going to elect certain persons who were other partners who met certain eligibility criteria, and they want to elect them to the board. So I nominated myself, and I was also fortunate that the requirement was that if you got the most votes, you became the senior independent director who would coach other partners on the board, and also would be chair the remuneration committee of partners. And fortunately, I got the most vote and I was on the same. So I was on the board of KPMG for 4 years. This sort of helped prepare me for the second inning of independent director when that started to happen.
Very interesting. So my next question is a segue from what you just said. Given all the changes that have happened in the Companies Act and so on, the fiduciary responsibility of a non-executive or an independent director is the same as that of an executive director. What should an individual look out for before they accept a board position?
So, earlier people, when they looked at the board position, the first thing was, can I create value for this company? Can I make an impact?
Correct.
Today, that's not the first question you should be asking when you have a board opportunity. It's risky to be on boards, very clearly. And I would say there are 3 things which you need to do. Diligence, diligence, and diligence.
Well said.
Very often we don't do that. And I was very clear that I had a, reputation, personal reputation. I couldn't, and having seen some of the things which have happened with some boards, and, very good people have got impacted unnecessarily, in some senses.
Correct.
And so I said, look, I will only choose boards where I have comfort. That's the first criteria, and that's how I've chosen the 3 corporate boards. I did eventually take up.
Interesting. So I'm going to move to now a few questions for you personally. I've got time for 3 or 4 questions. My first question to you is, Arvind, where do you draw your inspiration from?
So, I often asked, I read a lot. So there's a book by Simon Sinek who's written, What's Your Why? Right.
Yeah.
So one of the whys, as I told you earlier, was I'm curious and I like to do new things all the time, which is one of the reasons why I chose not to remain in consulting after I this thing, which is the normal route. Everybody, I had a platform to be a consultant, but to break from the past, so to speak. So I was curious and I decided to do the break. The second is that I like to read a lot, as I said. So, basically, which helps me to connect and be abreast of things which are happening.
Correct.
And this enables me, I feel, to take up new things, and, new ideas, new opportunities. And I know that maybe something I'll take up later, which will be linked to what I've been reading,
Sure.
in that sense, because, basically, the more I actually curate a daily newsletter, which basically has, I don't market it, but I've got about 500-600 subscribers.
Why don't you add me to that also?
Sure, I'll do that. Yeah. So, and while I was reading earlier also as a consultant, you have to, but not reading enough fiction. So today, the last 2 years, I set up goals to increase my reading. And last year I read 65 books, which is more than once a week. And I'm on track to read about 50. And half of them are nonfiction and half of them are fiction. So I'm reasonably abreast of what's happening across, in whether it's world level, India level, in that sense. So
interesting.
So serendipitously, new things happen based on what you read, and opportunities come on that basis.
Terrific. So I have time for 2 more questions for you. My next question is, and this becomes more relevant in your role as the president of IIMPACT. The question is, if you were a role model to millions of children who closely followed your life choices, what is the one thing you would change in yourself?
Actually, the way I would put it is that they're probably, I haven't really changed. And that's what people also tell me a lot over the years.
Right.
And that sort of helped me adapt to new roles.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would tell children is that very often we get enamored. Degrees are important. I won't say that degrees are important. But today's world, where it is possible to educate yourself on the net,
correct,
right? And this become increasingly so today. So yes, you do need to understand technology. You do need to understand many other things. But what is more important than basically the degree which you get? That's a starting point. More important than the degree which you get is having a lifelong learning ability. You need to take personal responsibility. It's not your company's responsibility. You can't blame the company if you didn't learn.
Correct.
Today, it's even more. There's no lifelong jobs anymore. Right. So you have to continually learn, and that's your responsibility. Take it as your responsibility, and make time for learning outside your job.
Correct. Very interesting. And okay, I'm going to take one more question, and this relates to the pandemic. How are you rethinking your life in a new world order?
Actually, if you ask me, intrinsically, it is not changing in the purpose which I have, which is basically the reason for what I'm doing things today, as I've already said. But how you do it does change. And in today's world, it becomes even more important. I talked about network. A lot of my career, I had to physically talk to media, physically bring my talk in seminars, and so on and so forth. Today, you have to, we're going to a digital world, in a much more accelerated fashion, even in India. Maybe it takes 1 year or 2 years more, but we are in a digital world. So you need to manage many roles simultaneously from home and at work, once you are able to do. So manage your digital career, your digital footprint, your networks in a digital way, which is what is required in the current environment, is more so required. And if you're an introvert, as I have been, you have to make that extra effort to reach out, so to speak.
Okay. Arvind, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you, and I wish Impact and you lots of success.
Thank you, Ashut. It's been great talking to you, and all the success with your podcast. I think great work which you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.